Hello everyone! The first beta changes for the 5.0 characters have arrived, and it's a total slaughter by HOYOverse. Despite leakers saying that Mualani would be getting a slight nerf, in reality HOYO decided to bring down the nerf hammer hard on Mualani specifically. Seems like someone at HOYOverse didn't like her challenging the Hydro Sovereign as the premier Hydro main DPS. Both Kinich and Kachina also received some slight changes as well, so I wanted to briefly cover all the changes made to Mualani, Kinich, and Kachina and what it means for their overall kit gameplay and strength in the meta. First of all, every 5.0 character got slightly nerfed because both natlan artifact sets had their numbers slightly decreased. The 2-piece of the DPS set, Obsidian Codex, had its damage bonus decreased by 5%, just a slight nerf making it very similar to Marachuse Hunter. Still a solid set for natlan main DPSs. The 4-piece of the support set, Scroll of the Embered City's Hero, had its total damage percent buff decreased from 45% to 40%. Again, a slight nerf to the amount of damage percent you can share to your team. Despite this, it's still an extremely strong set, sharing 40 damage percent is still very good. Next, let's address the elephant in the room, Mualani. With her initial kit and numbers, according to many theorycrafter calculations, Mualani was looking to have some of the highest DPS teams in the game. This came with the big caveat of Mualani having clunky gameplay issues and less consistency due to her damage being bursty and concentrated to only a few hits per rotation. With this week's beta update, HOYOverse slightly increased Mualani's damage falloff against multiple enemies, thus decreasing her damage in AoE, and targeted Mualani's high HP scaling multipliers, which came from the enhanced normal attacks from her skill. Previously, her fully stacked Shark Bite attack had a 130.2% HP scaling multiplier at talent level 10. Now, it is only a 113.1% HP scaling multiplier at talent level 10. If this was an attack scaling multiplier, this wouldn't be a big difference, but because it scales off of HP, the decrease is much more significant. The multiplier now is about 15% less than the original multiplier. Once again, leaker TC saying that, oh, it's only a slight nerf. Well, guess what? It's not a slight nerf. This is a very significant nerf. However, this doesn't actually mean that Mualani's overall DPS decreased by 15%. It's actually more because most calculations assume that instead of just using 2 fully stacked Shark Bite attacks every Mualani skill, you can actually fit a third unstacked one for an extra hit of damage. And that hit, which multiplier I bolded, got nerfed as well. Overall, Mualani's team DPS actually decreased by about 20 to 25%. There were also some other miscellaneous changes. First, Mualani's A1 now gives 3 fewer Night Soul points when Mualani catches her floater after using a fully stacked Shark Bite attack. I think the intention of this is to prevent people from fitting in that extra unstacked Shark Bite I mentioned earlier, but even with this change, it's actually still possible, so this change pretty much doesn't do anything. Next, she has a new special exploration passive that adds the ability to see natlan resources on the map and adds some extra benefits from harvesting those resources. Also, C2 originally said that Mualani was able to spawn 2 floaters to gain additional Night Soul points. Apparently this was a translation error, so this was fixed. The C2 right now still allows for an extra attack for Mualani, but it is just somewhat difficult to fit it in at the current moment. Also, apparently Mualani was able to bunny hop while riding on a shark in the overworld for increased speed. With this update, this was removed, so that kinda sucks. And lastly, one additional positive thing for Mualani is that the new natlan craftable catalyst was buffed, so great for free-to-play players. So with this 20 to 25% nerf in her team damage, what does this mean for Mualani? Here are some of the team calculations post Mualani nerf done by J-Stern. Again, great theorycrafter, highly suggest checking him out. Here are some of the key takeaways. First, with this nerf in her damage, her best teams are more narrowed into strictly vape teams, whether normal vape or burn vape. Teams like Mono Hydro, Bloom, and Electro Charge, for instance, don't do as much damage anymore due to the decreased multipliers. Sure, they can still work, but the numbers aren't nearly as high as they were before. There is now much more incentive to vape her damage, and as you can see, her vape teams are still quite strong, arguably still some of the top sheet DPS in the game. Technically, these numbers are still higher than Nivulette's teams. But this is where Mualani's gameplay issues come in. Sure, she can deal some nice bursts of screenshot damage, but is this damage justified when you have to deal with the gameplay clunkiness resulting from both overkilling enemies and from Mualani having to run into enemies and waiting until you have full stacks before attacking? If this was Mualani pre-nerf, I would say that her high damage is justified with the amount of practical gameplay issues she has. But post-nerf, even if her damage is still theoretically high on paper, I don't think her current damage is high enough to completely justify her practical gameplay problems, which will feel even worse at lower investment. At Mualani's current state, I would say that she's very similar to Linny. Both are some of the top DPSs you can pull in this game, no doubt, but you will have to go through a lot of loops to play them correctly and properly. Linny with his charged attacks, and Mualani with her shark riding and limited damage instances. She's still a strong character, and if you want to see some easy screenshot numbers, Mualani is definitely the character for you, even at C0. But with her current state, I don't think she can compete with the Hydro Sovereign, especially in overall quality of life. Next, let's cover the changes made to Kinich. He took a hit with the artifact set nerf, but kit-wise, nothing changed. His normal talent multipliers were changed, but you never use these anyway, so these numbers are pretty irrelevant. Like Mualani, Kinich gained a new exploration passive as well that gives the ability to see natlan resources on the map and gives some extra benefits when harvesting those resources. And his C6 got a buff, so that's cool. The most significant changes to Kinich come from his signature weapon. The stats were changed to have an extremely high base attack and less crit rate. Due to the fact that you get a lot of crit rate from Obsidian Codex already, this is an overall buff to the signature weapon. In addition, one of Kinich's best free-to-play weapons, the new Claymore Craftable, got a buff because its special passive can now be triggered off-field, which is great. One last thing I want to mention is that in my initial impressions video, I said that there was a possibility that Kinich's A1 passive and the signature weapon would be able to work with bloom reactions because of some certain CN translations. However, no text changes have been made to the English description this week, so I think it's safe to assume that the correct reactions are indeed burning and bursion. So Kinich's possible team comps are fairly streamlined into these two archetypes. Overall, after these changes, Kinich pretty much stayed the same. Lastly, the Kachina changes. First, there were some minor Night Soul point changes to her skill, exploration passive, and C2. To summarize, my previous assumption was that at C0, her skill attacks 6 times and at C2, 8 times. With these changes, she gets an extra hit, so that's nice. Other than that, her A1 passive Geo buff was increased by 2 seconds, and like Mualani and Kinich, Kachina gained an exploration passive that gives the ability to see natlan resources on the map and gives some extra benefits from harvesting those resources. The biggest hit to Kachina is the artifact support set nerf, but other than that, Kachina also remained pretty much the same. And those were all the character kit changes for this week's beta update. I'm not surprised with the artifact set nerfs. They were both very strong, and even with the nerfs, they still are. I'm happy that Kinich and Kachina received relatively little changes. They both are fine at their current state. You can argue that they can receive some buffs, but overall they're still pretty solid at the moment. Mualani, however, is a different story. There was an argument to be had that her initial kit was too strong number-wise, and I would kind of agree with this. But like I mentioned in my initial impressions video on Mualani, I think that her high damage is justified because of her gameplay clunk. But at her current state, even though her theoretical DPS is still technically very good, there are just so many things that can go wrong practically to the point where I think Mualani was nerfed too much. I do think she deserves a buff to counteract some of the damage of this week's nerf. If not, then we might just have to wait for the release of the Pyro Archon, which will improve those teams. But there are still plenty of weeks of the 5.0 beta, so we'll just have to see what HOYO decides to change in the upcoming weeks. If you enjoyed this update and analysis video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, it helps me out a ton. As always, leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below, join the Discord if you have any additional questions or just want to chill, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.